It's time to cook with Susan Beck. Well, today we are going to make stuffed green peppers, and this is something I love to make with my garden produce. You know, we're well into fall here, but I still have some gorgeous green peppers that I picked off of my plants. We're going to use some of the onions that we pulled out in August. Option, I'm going to use my fresh tomatoes. If you buy canned, fire roasted tomatoes are great as well. We're going to use some of our herbs. I've got some thyme, these little tiny little leaves of thyme, oregano, and then these giant beautiful leaves of basil. Check out some of my fresh herb videos. I know it's a little late, in the season now, but it'll give you some tips on how to grow them and plant them and use those herbs throughout the next growing season. So if you don't have those herbs, using some Italian seasoning, whether you use basil, oregano, and thyme in their individual jars, or you can buy a spice blend called Italian seasoning, those will all work great to spice up your green peppers just a little bit. We're gonna use some salt and pepper, and we're gonna use minute rice today, a cup of minute rice in our stuffed green peppers. Got squash here too. That'll be for another day though. So tomatoes, peppers, onions from the garden, along with those herbs if you have them. All right, you also could add a little salsa or ketchup to your mixture. It gives it a little bit of moisture, gives it a little bit of tang, or if the salsa, a little bit of zip. Today I am going to use the ketchup. Let's start by cleaning out the green peppers. We want to get all the seeds and most of the veining out of the inside. Now the traditional way to do this would be to take out the centers and to just stuff this as a great big tall pepper. But I have to say that I really like splitting them in half again. One thing, when they're tall like this, it's kind of hard to get those veins out. And I can put my knife down in here and hope I don't hurt myself trying to remove them. But then the other challenge is when it's time to eat these, they're just kind of tall and awkward to cut. So my favorite way to work with these green peppers is to cut them in half again, like this. So I have like 2 bell pepper boats. Then it's easier to kind of run my knife through and remove those veins. Do that with this other one here. Kind of removing out some of that bottom that's not so nice. A little more veining right there. Kind of where it's a little more white. So there are it's 1 green pepper, the 2 halves. And I like to just put those into a glass baking dish. These will be baking for an hour and a half. So you could make them up the night before if you don't feel you'll have that much time when you get home from work or whatever activities you have going on. And I'm going to cover them with foil for the majority of that cooking time. My oven is already preheated to 375 degrees, so it will be ready when I'm done stuffing these. All right, this one was kind of a shorter, squattier one, but it will still work and do the job. No matter what the shape of them is, or no matter how you decide to cut them, they still have the same flavor. All right, let's have a little closer look of me cutting up these peppers. So I'm just gonna cut off the top and then reach inside and pull out as much of that seed ball as I can. And then we've got all that white ribbing in there that I don't want. So I'm just gonna cut this in half again, and then I'm just gonna run my knife through there, removing the whiter parts, that ribbing. All right, now with bell peppers, the seeds are not hot. Now I'm only gonna cut up 3 of these. I find with a pound of hamburger, that's usually pretty good. I'll cut the 4th one if I feel like I have enough filling left. Here are my 3 cut up beautiful bell peppers. All right, let's start mixing our filling. I have today a pound of ground beef that I'm going to put into my bowl, and I'm just going to kind of break it up a little bit here, but we'll do most of that as we add the other ingredients. And I just find when I'm making meatballs or meatloaf for this, my hands just really kind of work the best for this. Also into there goes our spices. So I'm just going to just put, a good ½ teaspoon of salt and a few cranks around on my pepper grinder, and then add in my Italian herbs. Now I'm using fresh ones today, but again, you can use them out of a canister. Where did I set my knife? And if you do that, I'd say maybe a half a teaspoon of each one. You can go a little bit more than that when you're using the fresh herbs that haven't been dried yet. Now, this recipe, you can really do just about anything you want in terms of fillings. I have misplaced my original recipe. Several years ago, I misplaced it. And so I'm like, wow, I really liked those stuffed peppers. I just tried to remember what was in them. And so I know there was ketchup in them at that time in the recipe. But then along the way, sometimes I decided, oh, you know, I think I'll use salsa instead. I think it just called for tomatoes to begin with, but I really love the fire roasted if I'm using the canned ones again. Remember, today we're going to use the nice fresh tomatoes from the garden. I don't use canned ones much if I have access to the good summer tomatoes. In the middle of the winter, you might as well just use the canned ones, because I don't know about you, but I think those tomatoes in the produce department come December, January, February are pretty darn tasteless. All right, I think I have more oregano than I want. These tiny little leaves of thyme, I just kind of pull backwards on the stem and just go in just like that. Again, if you want a little more on my herbs, I do have some recipes on how to harvest these and use them in things like a chimichurri sauce and some of my casseroles. I don't want the woody stems of these. I also have a great video on how I preserve my herbs for winter by freezing them in olive oil. That was one of my more recent videos, so be sure to check that out as well. As for the tomatoes, I'm just going to cut these up. This one has a big core in the center, so I want to remove that. Throw that over here in my little bowl for the chickens. This is a really large tomato, so it's probably the only one I really need. It probably comes out pretty equal to these like 14-ounce cans that you buy at the store. I'm just going to dice that up well, and it will cook down as everything else bakes inside those peppers. Oh yeah, this is a lot of tomato here. You see I've got a spot that's not so nice, and I'm just going to get rid of there and just kind of chop it up a little bit. Those juices are great because they'll help the rice to cook. I did not peel my tomato. Feel free to do so, but the skins don't really bother me. I think they cook down rather well. So here I'm just going to get those seeds and juices a little bit up into my mixed season. All right, again, I just really don't measure. I'll put measurements in my recipe below in the description, but like 2 tablespoons, like 2 good squirts of your ketchup is great. You know, maybe 1/3 of a cup of salsa if you choose to go the salsa route, but again, that just adds a little flavor to it. I do like minute rice. I'm not adding any water to this, so the moisture from my tomatoes mixed with, you know, the meat has some moisture. That's going to cook my rice while it's in the oven for an hour and a half. So I tried it once with just a traditional white rice, like the long grain, and the rice just didn't cook very well. The pepper was nice and tender, the meat was brown, the rice was still chunky. So I do recommend, you know, almost anything else you can kind of swap out, but do recommend the minute rice. You know, and talking about that hamburger too, you know, ground turkey would work, ground pork would work. You can swap that meat out just very easily, okay? Pound for a pound. All right, one last thing I need to do though is to cut up my onions. So I am going to cut my onion in half. This is a big onion, so I do not need all of this onion in here. I don't want the onion to dominate. I do want to remove my outer skin here, but I'm going to keep that little root intact as I cut through my onion. Another video I have one of cutting just onions, on how to dice an onion. I'm going to cut this in 3 different directions. I'm going to cut down it, making some nice close cuts. In fact, you know what? I'm going to cut this in half again. But as I do that, I'm going to keep that root attached because I don't think I even need that much. I think 1/4 of this large onion will work. Happen to have a red or purple onion here today. You can use any kind you want. Then I'm going to cut it going across. And I will put the link below so you can see a nice close-up of me cutting this. All right, and then my last cut is the downward cut. And in the process of doing that, I just keep holding on to the root. I have that center piece that I don't really want to go over here in my garbage bowl. And I have nice diced onions. All right, in goes my probably close to half a cup of onions. Go lighter if you don't care for onions, or don't use them at all. If you don't have fresh onions, you know, minced onion would be perfectly fine in this dish. All right, so I mentioned hands, easiest way to mix this together. Now, I don't want to overmix, so like before, I was really light on how much I was kind of pulling that meat apart. I just want to get it mixed enough that there is rice in every bite and the onions are distributed throughout, along with all those pretty green herbs that I have put in here. There's our meat and rice mixture. Continuing on with my hands, I'm just going to take some of that mixture out and fill each of these pepper shells. And we'll see how much we have here and if I want to cut that other pepper up or not. But these are pretty decent sized green peppers, and the last time I did them I found that 3 green peppers was really all I had enough stuffing for with 1 pound of meat. So easy to increase your amounts if you want to make more. Like I said, it's just a recipe that you can kind of just throw things together. I didn't use any measuring cup, I guess, except for the rice. I did measure out my rice at a cup. I've been known not to always do that either. All right, this fills 3 shells. Very, very nice. Right, one last thing that I do like to do is put some breadcrumbs on the top. Again, that could be completely optional. I have these panko breadcrumbs here today, and I don't know, I just kind of like them over the other breadcrumbs. It does mean I purchased them rather than making my own, but there's something light about them. And these happen to be the Italian style, so they've got a few little flecks of green herbs in there as well. Wouldn't need to do this, but that little crunch on top, whether you're making a casserole or stuffed green peppers, is just a nice little touch. So tin foil goes onto the top. And you know, all you gotta do is walk away. Put this in the oven for an hour and a half and let them bake till those peppers are just really, really nice and soft. And like I said, I really like them so tender that I can just cut them with a regular knife and enjoy. So find something to entertain yourself with while your peppers cook at 375 degrees for about 90 minutes. Ooh. Some piping hot stuffed green peppers. Oh, those just look fantastic, but I'll warn you, they are very, very hot. So I'm gonna go ahead and scoop one of these out onto my plate, and then I'm gonna let that cool for a little bit here before I try to taste that on film. All right, time to dig into this delicious stuffed pepper. Oh, that pepper just cuts so easily. It's just very nice and tender. Get that piece there with that tomato. I love the little zip that the ketchup gives it. Those Italian seasonings are perfect. Got that little crunch from the panko breadcrumbs on the top. Yep. It's really nice and moist with that tomato, and then the juices that just kind of flow out of the green pepper really just make that rice the perfect texture. I can't wait to finish my stuffed green pepper. What a great way to use a lot of your garden vegetables, and if it's not garden season, just pick them all up at the store.